Welcome to this week's Engineering Ignition podcast with myself, Scott Buchanan. Thanks for tuning in, and I do hope you get to enjoy the show. And what a podcast we have in store today. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Allan Jones, who is the President and Chair of the International Energy Advisory Council. For those who are not aware, the IEAC is a not-for-profit company that provides independent advice to governments and other organisations who want to implement decisive steps towards a 100% renewable energy future and thereby contribute to the sustainable development and to climate change mitigation and adaptation. The IEAC's energy experts, analysis and consultants have collectively advised more than 200 governments and organisations in 28 countries, as well as more than 50 international organisations. It's fair to say Allan has an incredible background and in recent years has been this significant focal point across many countries in driving energy efficiency, renewable energy and climate change projects throughout the world from a senior and strategic standpoint. Now, to give you an idea, let me give you a flavour of what projects his senior leadership career has exposed him to. So initially, he was the Director of Thamesway Limited, Woking Borough Council's Energy and Environmental Services Company, where during his time at Woking, the council reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 77.5% below 1990 levels by 2004. Allan naturally progressed to becoming the CEO of the London Climate Change Agency from 2004 to 2008, which contributed to the development of the Mayor's Climate Change Action Plan, energy and climate change components of the revised London Plan, renewable energy and fuel cell trigeneration projects, and the energy and climate change components of the London 2012 Olympics bid. Allan was appointed Chief Development Officer of Energy and Climate Change of the City of Sydney from 2009 and 2014, where during his time at Sydney, the city reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 25% in the city's own property portfolio, established better buildings partnerships with major property landlords, which reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 52% in the property portfolio as well, and developed and adopted the Green Infrastructure Master Plan to deliver a 100% renewable energy city and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% below 2006 levels by 2030. He was also appointed an independent advisory board member of the National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility from 2011 to 2013. And the NCCARF was established with funding of $56.2 million Australian dollars from the government of the Queensland government and an additional 9 universities. It was hosted by Griffith University, the research facility, delivering 150 grant-aided research projects on how Australia can adapt to the impact of climate change with a total expenditure of over $60 million. And to top it off, Allan was appointed as a member of the Seoul International Energy Advisory Council to provide expert advice to the Seoul Metropolitan Government on its One Less Nuclear Power Plant Programme, Phase 1, and Sustainability Energy Action Plan, Phase 2. In 18 months to 2014, Seoul had reduced its centralised energy demand by 23,260 gigawatt hours and greenhouse gas emission by 6 million tonnes. The Phase 2 programme is still currently underway, which will reduce centralised energy demand by 46,250 gigawatt hours and greenhouse gas emissions by 10 million tonnes by 2020. It's incredible. The Seoul Energy Corporation was established in 2017 to take forward the programme of works. Now, in recognition of Allan's incredible work, Allan was appointed a member of the British Empire in 1999 for services to energy and water efficiency and was instrumental in Woking Borough Council being awarded the Queen Award for Enterprise. sustainable development in respect of his Energy Services Department activities in the development of local sustainable community energy systems. The only local authority ever to receive a Queen's Award for Enterprise. Now, I think it's fair to say Allan has significant insight into what can be achieved within energy and climate change from a number of perspectives, and I'm truly honoured and grateful and looking forward to discussing our hot topic today. Welcome to the show, Allan. Did I do you justice in my introduction?
I think so. Always have to sort of reduce it. When you've got a long CV, you have to chop stuff out of it, but we'll maybe pick up on some of that when we have a discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, one of the reasons I was keen to have this discussion with you is there's not many individuals in the world that actually have the exposure and the angles that you've been looking at over, from a strategic standpoint as well as a hands-on perspective as well. So let's see. So our hot topic today, which is the energy of everything and climate change. Is the world now sorted out? Are we 100% efficient energy, and there's no room for improvement? Where do you think is a good place to start a discussion?
Well, clearly there is action going on at the moment, and certainly a lot more than there was when I first started this at Woking, which was 1990. That's 2 years before the Rio Earth Summit. And really in recent years, we have seen certain parts of the world, UK amongst those, but also we've seen California and we've seen some of the other US states as well. Parts of Australia, maybe not the federal government, but certainly state governments are pushing their agenda there. So we are beginning to see big moves forward. So countries approaching 100% renewable energy, big programs on energy efficiency and so on. But in terms of where we need to be, it's not enough. We've got a long way to go. The 2050 timeframe, for those that know anything about climate change, is too far away. It needs to be much shorter than that. And as hopefully we'll find out during this conversation, you can achieve those 2050 targets a lot earlier than 2050. And that's why a lot of countries are adopting 2030 and at the latest 2040. And that's driven by the science. We actually need to reduce the emissions, not only by those huge amounts, but within a short time frame. Otherwise, the emissions that are in the atmosphere already, and don't forget they accumulate, so we've still got emissions there from the Industrial Revolution, they're still going to carry on climbing. And so we're already being confronted by the actions of climate change. And we can't do much to reverse those at the moment, certainly not within the next 100 years. So it is important to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at a far greater rate than most governments are adopting.
Okay, so yes, the target of the carbon mandate of 2050, and I guess this is what you've been involved in actually proving that things can speed up just because the way renewable energy and policies as well have always been, whatever way they've always been, there is always still room for improvement. Do we have any key examples that you would suggest tie in to back that up?
Well, as I said before, UK is doing quite well with renewable energy, particularly offshore wind. And they're also trying to tackle the issue of how we decarbonise natural gas and what will take its place. Some of the states in Australia have got will get to 100% renewable energy within the next few years. Certainly South Australia and the Australian Capital Territory, which is Canberra. It's quite perverse that the federal government seems to want to slow everything down and stick with coal and gas, whereas the actual local authority that runs Canberra will actually something like 75% renewables already, and they'll achieve their 100% renewables within the next 5 years. Similarly, we've seen some big moves in California. They keep bringing their renewable energy targets forward. Countries like Costa Rica are already at virtually 100% renewable energy. It isn't just renewable energy. We have to understand that it's a combination of energy efficiency and renewable energy, because your renewable energy component can achieve far more if you don't have to supply energy that is being wasted, what we call negawatts. And so if you can reduce energy consumption by 30, 40, 50%, then your renewable energy don't have to implement as much renewable energy over a longer time frame. It's really about taking a holistic approach. And not many governments have that. They tend to have these things in different departments. Energy efficiency tends to be in a different department to energy, for example. And it's important that we take a holistic approach to actually bring these targets forward much earlier than 2050.
Okay. And how easy is that to do? I mean, is that a challenge to me, trying to get, certainly in this country, things to move quicker can be challenging. So, I mean, is that fair across the world as well?
It's not an engineering issue. I am an engineer myself. It's actually a mindset and political issue.
Okay.
And of course, you've got opposing things going on. Governments make money out of fossil fuel, extraction licenses, the taxes that they get on it, and corporation tax. So it's quite difficult to actually wean governments off of fossil fuel.
Yeah.
But the economics around it. And it's about taking that leap from, you can actually also get income from renewable energy and energy efficiency that could displace or replace the income that governments get from fossil fuels. It's just that you need to do it in a different way. Fossil fuels charged by consumption. But over the years, of course, we've been used to paying for services. Classic example is the IT industry, mobile telephones, that sort of thing. You don't pay by consumption, you pay by service. You like to pay up front, fixed charges and so on. Yes, you might have a data allowance or something. And that's actually where we need to go with renewable energy, because issues about sort of efficiency and how much energy you can extract from the sun or the wind or flowing water or so on become almost irrelevant, because what you actually want is to have all your energy supplied by renewable energy, and there's many ways of doing that. And I guess the ideal utopia for a household consumer like you and I, or a business, would actually to generate all of your own energy, consume it yourself, and any surplus you can sell onto a neighbour or so on. That's the principle of decentralised energy. And you're turning consumers into prosumers. And we're even beginning to see this in some of the really big industries like, cement and so on. There's some really interesting work going on in Australia that's supplying huge energy loads solely from renewable energy.
Incredible. And that's happening there at the moment now. And we'll delve into the detail a little bit shortly, but in terms of the perception living in the United Kingdom and the year we're in versus listening to what's happening in Costa Rica or Australia, where I guess it's maybe a hotter climate, is it maybe easier to get the renewable energy source, therefore easier to implement these policies? I mean, is there hope for the United Kingdom? What stage? How are we going to do it? Or what's the challenges we face?
Yes, when you look at countries like Australia, I mean, the amount of solar energy that falls on Australia, they could supply more than half the world, if only it could be and exported to those places. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So
okay.
And obviously countries like states like California have similar things. Tasmania is virtually 100% renewable, principally based on hydro, because they've got mountains, got lots of rivers, and they're able to generate hydro from that. And so when you look at countries, you have to look what is their resource. And the biggest resource that the UK has is wind. We've got pretty much 50% of Europe's wind. Our coastal waters in the North Sea and elsewhere. And that's why we're seeing a booming offshore wind industry. And the wind turbines are just getting bigger and bigger. I can remember seeing the first wind turbines down at Delabold in Cornwall, 250 kilowatts. Now you can get them at 14.5 megawatts. And there's it doesn't seem, every couple of months somebody else seems to come out with a bigger one. And when you consider how much you can actually put in the North Sea and elsewhere, then the UK could probably be in a position that Australia could be with their solar. in terms of not only supplying huge amounts of renewable energy to itself, but also to be able to export it.
Wow.
And there are technologies, and we perhaps come on to that later, where we can convert electricity into renewable hydrogen, into renewable gases. You can inject these renewable methane into the gas grid. These are we can talk about projects that are going on elsewhere in the world at the moment, where we can take advantage of this. The interesting fact about Australia, when I did the Renewable Energy Master Plan, is that Australia is the world's second largest offshore wind resource, second only to Russia. And neither countries have offshore wind because they're driven by coal and gas and and that's what we need to change. Actually, governments can make just as much, if not more, money out of renewables.
Yeah.
And it is in resource. It's always there. You haven't got to forward predict how many years have you got before coal, oil, or gas runs out, because these are issues that governments are going to have to face in the future in any event. And it's much better to have a transition, and by that I mean rather than end up on two sides of an argument, actually help to transition the fossil fuel companies into renewable energy companies. They own lots of land by and large. You see some of these big mines, and in places they could actually generate renewable energy. Technologies that they develop, like liquefaction of gas and so on, can also be used for renewable gases and hydrogen. And they are essentially engineering companies, engineering business. But how do you change the mindset of people that are used to digging holes in the ground to actually something which is a lot more safer, erecting stuff above ground to capture the renewable energy from wind and solar, for example?
Yeah, no, and that's a valid point. I guess the tax or the income to any government is clearly very, very important, and energy is something that everybody uses, and they can probably predict that energy equals X amount of money coming into the government's bank account. So the very fact that you're suggesting, or the facts are, if we've got one of the the UK has significant wind resource, and assuming we can capture that and store it and send it on, then there is actually scope for us selling, rather than buying our electricity from, I believe France is quite a major supplier at the moment, we can actually sell it on. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And the kind of mindset we're beginning to see that people are beginning to try and get their head around, particularly governments. What happens when you move from a fossil fuel transport fleet to an electric fleet? There's no fuel duty taxes, for example.
Yeah.
So these are sort of economic issues and political issues. And unfortunately, politicians just have been brought up on this since day one. They just can't think outside the box. And actually, you think, what you need to do is to change the tax structure. Instead of having a tax on consumption, you have a tax on use. So, for example, road charging. It doesn't matter whether that's a car driven by petrol, diesel, or an electric vehicle. There is a mechanism to actually replace the fossil fuel duties with some kind of usage system as opposed to a consumption system. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about, is actually using a bit of sort of smart economics around how the energy thing is changing from something like fossil fuels, which is a consumption commodity, to something that is a usage commodity. And that, to me, that doesn't seem to be too difficult.
Yeah.
I think most people, other than politicians, but I think that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And they're the kind of discussions we should be having now, because this is moving forward.
Yeah.
The trouble with that is you can end up with some unintended consequences. You can end up with stranded assets, even stranded renewable assets. Because one of the reasons why we did the Renewable Energy Master Plan in Sydney is that actually, if you look at anywhere around the country, even those countries and states that are doing well with renewable energy, they don't actually have a plan as to how much renewable energy they actually need. Wind, solar, hydro, storage. They don't have a plan, not a big master plan. Whereas the fossil fuel, if you're in the electricity industry, they always have a plan. They have had right from day one. They have to know how many coal-fired power stations, gas, oil, storage, pump storage, all that sort of thing. They have to have that as part of the plan in order to provide 100% fossil fuel system. Well, you need to start thinking about how you do the same thing, but for renewable energy. Otherwise, you could be investing money in a particular technology or resource that you'll find in the future you've got too much of. Or you should have built it for an export market rather than for use in that country. So things like that politicians and even economists are not really thinking about, because it's just like, get as much renewable energy in as you can, but we still need gas-fired backup generators for when you get the peaks and troughs when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. All those arguments, which we're beginning to see out-engineered by storage technologies and so on. So I think that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about. And when you think about that, if you join all those dots up together, because the resources there, we've got far more renewable resources in the world than we could ever consume. It's really about joining up these dots. And then you see, well, if we get the economics right, if we get the taxation right, and that the governments can be comfortable that they can get the same income from taxation from renewables and electric cars or whatever they have from fossil fuels, it just makes it a whole lot easier. And then you'll see it accelerate, because who wants to actually see people going underground digging coal and the health and safety issues that goes with that? It'd be far better if these people were working above ground. And as I said before, mining companies, they are really engineering companies. It wouldn't be much retraining to move from mining to building wind, solar farms, electrolyzers, whatever technologies you need. And then your export markets, where you're used to exporting fossil fuel natural gas, you could be exporting renewable gas or renewable hydrogen. So it's really about changing the mindset of businesses as well. And transition, I think you need something where governments need to help those companies transition. Whereas what we've got at the moment is a bit laissez-faire. There is some helps renewable companies. They had these bidding rounds for the North Sea offshore wind farms, and there's some other stuff going on in the background that you don't hear about. They're still providing fossil fuel support for bills and so on, and none of it's joined up. There are different departments in governments, and that's what's got to change, because we are moving into a whole new world. And it's going to happen in any event. It's just that it could happen a lot easier and a lot more economical with much less pain if this was managed properly, a proper transition by government working with business to actually move from A to B at a lot faster rate than we are currently doing at the moment.
Yeah, no, you absolutely. And one of the when you work with sizable and scalable organisations, what you tend to find is that each department within the organisation tends to focus internally on their own area rather than working together as a bigger company in some cases. And I guess it's the same with the government as well, isn't it? Whereby they each will have their own remit and they're not interested in whatever else it is. So actually getting these departments to talk to each other for the greater good of the environment, if nothing else, and for future generations is really important. Allan, just before we delve in, I gave an initial profile at the start. Is there anything? Clearly, look, you have some significant background, and is there anything specific within what you've learned in recent times that we really should be focusing in on now? Is there any lessons that you've maybe learned that you think, do you know what, if we did this, it'll work?
I think we come to people, and how do you convince people to do something? And I guess, you'll find loads of articles of what I've done in all of these places, but most of them really miss the point. It isn't necessarily the technology that is the exciting bit about all this. It's the fact that I've actually got local authorities and business to actually do something that they weren't previously doing. That thing. Now, how do you do that? And that's the bit that sort of intellectual property, if you like, that has never really been tapped into. I'll give you an example. In Sydney, when I first arrived in Sydney, all these things we were talking about, and we implemented a major program because they wanted to reduce energy consumption in a very short period of time. And so I had energy efficiency, I had LED street lighting, had trigeneration, had renewable energy. But when I looked in, and this was no surprise to me because it was the same in the UK, they're all in different departments. So how do you manage that? Because then you've got different directors with their own budgets and also a little bit concerned about somebody outside taking control. So I agreed with the CEO that I would actually work for the CEO of the City of Sydney. I would be in her department, and that I would actually not have much staff under me. I would actually use the staff that already existed in these departments. I would work with the directors. So for the property department, etc., I wanted to implement building energy retrofits, and we did that on an output performance specification. I said, well, put all your properties in there. I want the last 5 years of energy consumption, electricity, gas, so to give as much information as possible to the tenderers in order to work out how they could reduce energy. And the interesting thing here, it wasn't necessarily the cheapest tender that we were looking for. It was the tender that produced the greatest amount of reduction in energy consumption. And we took the same approach with LED lighting and solar energy. And if you put it as an output performance, you then find that people can actually give you more than you've asked for an input specification, because usually consultants typically say, we want so many megawatts of solar, or we want so many LED lights. We changed all that and we reversed it around. And it also made the directors and the departments and the staff within those departments more comfortable, because I hadn't changed their working arrangements at all. We hadn't created a new department. We hadn't done anything like that. Just made use of the people that were already there to deliver a program driven from the top. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't, if you wanted to argue with me, then you'd also be arguing with the CEO of the City of Sydney. So that was always in the background. But you don't deal with these situations through fear. You want to bring people along with you, particularly in the case of Sydney. They hadn't done anything. Australia hadn't done anything. You're suddenly moving from running a city like you've always done. All of a sudden, you've got to change it all, and we've got to start doing all these weird and wonderful technologies. But it happened. We did that in a short period of time. And to a certain extent, we did the same thing in Seoul as well, making that use. And of course, each time I move on from somewhere, in London, Sydney, you learn from what you've done before. Yeah. Or necessarily mistakes, but better ways of doing things. Also, you've got to appreciate that you go to different countries, different cities. They're not necessarily the same as the UK. They might speak English, but the local government setup in Australia is completely different to what it is in the UK. So you have to be mindful of that. So I think I could talk for a long time about that sort of human side of things, but actually that's the thing that's most often missed in articles about this, because everyone wants to focus on solar, trigen, energy efficiency, because that's the bit that they think their readers want to see. But it's capturing this bit of how do you change the hearts and minds of people to get them to do things that they've never done before.
Yeah, and I mean that's incredible. And with that Sydney example, did you find you were up against it all the time, or was it quite easy to get mindsets around to your way of thinking?
No, once people understood there wasn't going to be another department created, climate change. I wasn't going to second staff from their department. I wasn't going to take bits of their budgets. They still kept the budgets. It's just that now we reprofiled the budgets to do things that it wasn't previously set there to do. So, and that's something that meant in some instances I had to go out to dinner with the director and his senior managers and just relax. So things that you don't actually think about when you're talking about engineering or technical stuff. It's this human side. It just made everyone feel comfortable. I'm not here to take your job, to tell you what to do. We've got this program of works to do. You don't know how to do it. I'm here to help you. This is how we're going to do it. And essentially, I had very little staff where I was at the Sydney because I didn't need them, because I had staff in other departments.
And you got it all sorted out. Well done. And actually, and we can maybe do that another day. One around you and I talked about the Olympics recently, and you did a similar idea there, whereby, again, in fact, maybe worth touching on that just now, whereby you won the bid because there was something specific on it that you did that others didn't?
Well, when we looked at the specification for Olympics changes every 4 years, and one of the problems with the Olympics is that you only got 4 years between knowing that you've won something and actually delivering it. And we know that you can't really do that within 4 years, so you have to do some preparation work in advance. I mean, one of the things with the Olympics, for example, is that we got a transmission grid line and 132 kV primary distribution line, running several kilometres across the land. They had to be underground. It was nearly a £1 billion worth of work there. So that was put out to tender and all geared up to actually let a contract. So if we did win the bid, it could be let straight away. If we didn't win the bid, the work wouldn't happen. But the bid itself, everyone does a good sporting bid. And so when you come to point scoring, there's not a lot to choose between Los Angeles, London, Paris, or whatever. So you then have to look at that parts that is on the outer edges of the specification, like this Olympics. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to have renewable energy, recycled water, and all the rest of it. So we put a lot of effort into that part of the bid because we know that the sporting part of the bid will be as good, if not better, than others. But in terms of points, pretty much there. Maybe other cities had a slightly better sporting approach. So we focused on the sustainability. So we put renewable energy in there, we put energy efficiency there, we put water recovery systems, we had alternative transport systems. We even did things that seems obvious now, but of course had never been done before, was that instead of building an athletes' village, and then after the Olympics was over, demolish it and then build something else in its place, we actually built apartments to start with. What essentially happened was that the athletes actually occupied apartments that were designed for people to live in, not for athletes, and that were actually going to be put on the market and sold or put to social housing after the Olympics had finished. And it's those kind of things when we talk about sustainability. And we think that we won the bid on those bits that were around that, which other cities hadn't really focused on. Mm-hmm. They just put everything into flat architectural designs, the sporting side of the things, those kind of things, which pretty much of a muchness these days, whichever city puts in a bid. But the sustainability bit was the bit that we feel was different and significantly better than other cities. But we were still surprised we won the bid.
No, and here, what an Olympics, and I had the pleasure, I was lucky enough to be there, and what you created was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I believe it's totally changed now as well. It's a good part of London that's been used that wasn't there before.
Oh, well, you should have seen it before the Olympics. It's not a very nice place. The River Lee was choked up with all kinds of rubbish, tyre burning factory.
Okay, so go back to the hot topic. So look, we I guess looking at what we've got governments that need to embrace working closer together with the commercial world and embracing modern renewable energy tactics to speed up renewable energy and strategy behind it all. I mean, how far down this line are we? So, I mean, how well are we placed at the moment? How can we improve?
Well, as I said earlier, we are doing things, but we don't have 100% plan. We just, the government puts out a bidding round for offshore wind.
Yeah.
And actually, what we're actually going to do with that electricity, is it all going to go into the grid? And what happens when we say, we've got too much renewable, so we'll stop building offshore wind farms, even though there's a huge resource out there? So it needs to think, in actual fact, we can make use of that. We can turn that into an export market, because the The North Sea gas and oil is declining quite significantly now, and this could be what could replace it. So we just need to think about this whole joined-up thing, and government isn't there. In fact, no government is there, to be honest. There are no governments around the world that have, even those that are doing even better than the UK with renewable energy, that haven't thought about what a renewable energy society would look like, how we would balance these systems, how we would how governments maintain their income from taxation. So those kind of big questions. No one's really thinking about that, and they're the things that are stopping progress. Because all the time you have governments, so we can't have, and we've clearly seen this with the federal government in Australia, who have become the political wing of the fossil fuel lobby. They're no longer a political party, but the same party in state governments are implementing renewable energy. It's just the federal government that's out of step with everybody else, and that's because it's a mindset. It's a fossil fuel mindset. You get political donations from these big companies. You get extraction licenses you can make money from. You get various fuel duty, fossil fuel levies and things that you get from companies that mine and use the fossil fuels for energy generation, transport, and so on. And really, it's about changing that mindset to bring it forward, because it's going to happen in any event. We saw once before, we talked about energy. At the beginning of the century, the predominant form of transport was the horse and carriage, with horses, and they had to be the stations had to be certain distances apart, because the horses could only go so far, and they needed water. You needed to change horses, maybe. And we can all imagine in America the Wells Fargo and all that sort of thing. And it is quite amusing to see people getting so hung up about the driving range of electric cars compared to petrol and diesel. You pull into a fuel station, it takes you a few minutes to fill up your car, and off you go. And they're trying to replicate that experience for electric vehicles, which doesn't work. Most cars don't travel very far at all, and they could quite easily do all their charging from home. They're a lot cheaper than plugging in somewhere. And if you are going to fuel externally, then these are going to be like, out of town shopping centres, supermarkets, probably the big motorway service stations. They've usually got a lot of land, huge car parks, because people, are they really bothered? They come in, they plug into a socket, and they go in and have a cup of coffee or breakfast or lunch or dinner, or they've got shops in there now. People go shopping in these places. It's a different experience. Yeah. And there isn't enough room. If you wanted to charge a lot of electric cars in a fossil fuel station, there isn't enough room. There'll be queues or whatever. So that is in the same way that the internal combustion engine displaced the horse and carriage, using completely different method of renewing their energy compared to horses and carriages. And so the kind of change that we'll see with electric vehicles. And I think also for the bigger vehicles, we'll also see hydrogen coming along as well, for those vehicles that need much longer range, carrying much heavy loads. We could even see, in the same way that we see petrol and diesel, we'll be seeing renewable electricity and renewable hydrogen running our transport system. And all that's possible. Isn't the technology that's holding us back? It isn't even the lack of engineers or the know-how to do this. It's the politics and the perverse economics that we have around these systems.
Yeah. So, and you're right. I know certainly the hydrogen pieces, certainly there's a lot of investment going on there at the moment, certainly in the UK, and that's an up-and-coming technology that you're probably fully aware of. And I guess it comes back to the same point as you said earlier. It's about mindset. It's about people recognising the plan. So at the end of the day, just because, the reason that there's petrol stations is that the cars wouldn't move without the petrol. So it's now a case of, you can make your life better by having potentially a charging point in your house whereby you're charging it with solar panels off your roof or whatever it is, and actually you don't need to go to a petrol station, perceived petrol station or similar. So it's just getting heads around that, isn't it? And engaging governments to allow that to happen. What about modernisation, Alan? I mean, renewable energy, I guess we're all saying, there's been so much development, we're there. I mean, is there scope for modernising? What can improve?
Oh yes, quite significantly, and that's one of the areas that I always keep in touch. I mean, engineers should always keep themselves in touch with what's going on, but very few do. There are really some exciting things going on with solar, with storage, and even with electric vehicles. There are universities that have developed solar technologies that are much more, twice as efficient as solar that we have today. Even some solar technologies that can be embedded in glass, so your windows not only provide you with light but generate electricity. There are even companies that have developed so-called zombie cells, which can actually generate electricity from indoor lighting.
Yeah.
I've got a watch that relies on solar and has a small capacitor in it which charges up. So we're talking a technology like that, but big, that is able to supply more electricity efficiency, but you don't have to go out into the sun to generate it. So watch this space with zombie cells. And on batteries, technologies, you'll see lithium-ion replaced by more advanced systems using cheaper materials. So the cost of and we've already seen that Tesla are changing the batteries for their cars that they're making in China to one of these new technologies, which is going to be cheaper than lithium-ion, and therefore bring the cost of the car down. And so we're not far off, maybe only a few years away, where electric vehicles, instead of being more expensive than fossil fuel vehicles, and do need grant support from government to get that industry going, you'll see them becoming cheaper. So and when you get to that point, what we call the tipping point, well, why would you want to go out and buy a diesel car or a petrol car if you've got one for £1,000 cheaper or £2,000 cheaper than an electric vehicle that you could generate your own energy from? You've got solar, as you say. And technologies now, we've got vehicle-to-grid systems where you can actually use the electricity stored in your car battery to supply your house at different times of the day. So time of day charging, smart technologies, smart metering, although we're beginning to see those come in now with companies offering these different tariffs for people that have got electric vehicles. So there's some big changes going on, and we're beginning to see we spoke about renewable hydrogen earlier, which we've always known we can make hydrogen from electrolysis. But there's some work going on in Queensland, for example, where they've developed a technology that can convert that hydrogen straight through to renewable methane to the same specification as natural gas. There's no carbon. There are other companies that are actually using electrolysis from biogases and extracting the carbon and selling that into the carbon products market as graphite, for water purification, for industry and so on. And it's when people talk about carbon, capture and sequestration, burying it in the ground, it's about they're making carbon from energy, when actually you could set the virtuous circle there and choose the technologies that give you that carbon or graphite to be used elsewhere, and not just store it away and hope that it doesn't leak out. And so it's just and that's because people, when they get into these industries, are focused on their particular technology, solar or batteries or wind. There's very few companies that deal with all of these. And then you start to think about, well, what happens with carbon that you capture? Can we do something with that rather than just burying it in the ground? So there's a lot of things like that just needs holistic thinking around. And we're not really getting that from government at the moment.
Yeah. And is that purely from what you're seeing and your role? Are you seeing that depending on what country you look at, there's different levels of investment, stroke success, I guess?
Yes, that's right. And that's one of the advantages I've had, I guess, being involved with so many countries around the world. I've mentioned a few ones that I was specifically involved in. It does make you see that it is different in different countries. I mean, the laws of physics are the same around the world, but the way that countries and governments deal with this issue, there's different regulations around. That's the big thing. That's the regulatory barriers. I mean, one of the reasons I was able to do what I did in Woking is that we put in private wire networks to get round the regulatory barriers, because we knew we could extract more income from that than just selling it to the grid. And that's essentially what was used. We're able to reduce people's not just heating bills, but also electricity bills by taking that approach. And you think to yourself, well, why is, because electricity, the laws of physics dictate electricity will always flow to the nearest demand. So if you're generating surplus power on your solar in your house, it's only going to go to your next door neighbour. But why do you have to have all them other charges, transmission losses, distribution losses, use and system charges, all those other things, treat you as if you were a 1,000 megawatt power station? And those regulations, they kind of exist all around the world. And some countries are a lot worse than the UK. It's actually illegal to generate your electricity in some countries. You can be for that. And they're the kind of things that have got to be overcome. And the reason why you have those rules and regulations in place is because they're trying to protect the status quo. And another example from history is that the first lighting, of course, was gas lighting. And when electricity came along, did they use all their lobbying power to actually stop local authorities from switching from gas lighting to electric lighting? And when we see the results of that, and even with cars, of course, in order to protect the horse and carriage industry, some cities introduced the man with the red flag to walk in front of the car to make sure that the car couldn't go faster than the horse and carriage. Supposedly for health and safety reasons, but it was the same. It was the walking speed, which is what horse and carriage would effectively be. It's a little bit better than that if you're going into a city road. So there are vested interests out there that just want to stop you doing stuff, and they want to carry on as much as possible. We saw that with the tobacco industry. We've known about tobacco and cancer for years, and yet it was strung out and strung out and strung out and strung out to stop these laws come in, smoking in public places and so on. We're seeing the same thing with energy, and these are things that we need to be aware of, and we need to we need to try and bring people with us. So yes, that's your industry at the moment, but you could be in this industry. You have 80-90% of the capacity and the know-how to actually do this. So instead of being a coal miner, you can be a hydrogen miner.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Alan. And actually, from a UK standpoint, is there a way of measuring how well we're doing? I mean, how do we quantifise, where we are versus where we're going?
The government does produce annual energy statistics. UK digested UK energy statistics and the emissions that go with that. And of course, we have seen a big reduction in coal generation, less than it was in the Industrial Revolution. We've seen that happen literally in the last few years. So it will be no surprise when coal is eventually phased out within the time frame that the government was saying. The problem I think we have in the UK at the moment is the fossil fuel natural gas industry and the issues around fracking and stuff like that. And actually, do we actually need that industry at all? Could we not replace that with a renewable gas industry, renewable hydrogen or renewable biomethane or whatever, through the measures that I've said already? I mean, one of the Committee on Climate Change got it right in that, as you know, natural gas is going to be banned for new developments, 2025, I think it is. So what will take its place? We've got this huge pipe network and storage infrastructure that currently houses natural gas. That could be used for renewable gas, but they've obviously recognised that renewable hydrogen could take the place of natural gas. But their thinking is around still using natural gas and having carbon capture and sequestration. And I think that just doesn't wash. And I think there'll still be issues to do with fracking. There'll still be issues to do with noxious emissions. There'll be issues to do with water consumption for these sites, as well as the polluted produced water. So they're all issues that don't go away just because you're burying carbon dioxide under the ground. And actually, we've got this huge renewable energy resource. We've also got a significant solar resource in the UK, which is a lot of solar energy, more actually than Australia.
Really? Okay.
And we've got this huge offshore wind industry as well as onshore wind. You know, you just need to think it through. So actually, let's make use of this instead of that. And let's help these companies that are used to drilling holes in the ground to do stuff above ground.
So, very easy getting people round to that way of thinking. So, I mean, is that what needs to happen then to ensure success? I mean, what is that the key factor? Is basically mindset changes in organisations.
It isn't technology, it isn't capacity. All of those things can be delivered. It's really about changing the mindset. And that is not just government, of course, but also business, particularly the businesses at the moment that are heavily invested in the fossil fuel industry. They don't want to go out of business. They've got shareholders and so on. How do we help them transition? Now, that may be that we end up with the NVIDIA situation where we're providing some sort of taxation to wealthy companies, but only to that part of their business that is transitioning. So there is ways and means of doing this to help people transition from one energy industry to another energy industry. And I think that's where the politicians and the economists need to put a lot of their grey matter together as to how that can be achieved, what kind of pace can it be achieved. Let's just bring everyone together, because it's not impossible to get to 100% renewable energy future much earlier than 2050. It can be easily achieved, but we need to do it in the way that we need to phase out the old system and bring in the new system at a fairly rapid rate with support from government.
Well, let's see how we get on. I think you're speaking a lot of sense, and it makes perfect good, an understanding of. And I've written down a couple of key points here around, the mindset change of usage versus consumption of households and I guess of businesses as well. The joined up plan of energy companies, so that there is a greater goal, and governments are also as part of that plan, so that everyone's working together. And I guess the sustainability piece as well, whereby I think. People can change, and I think that the scenario this year that we're all faced with, people, whether they like it or not, can actually change, because everyone has had to. And I guess it's just now whether people want to change and actually can keep it, keep that motivation going for the environment.
There are people talking about the link between COVID and climate change. Not that there's a joint, but what governments were forced to do in a very short period of time, especially this government and the financial packages they put around that, could be done for climate change. It said it wouldn't be anywhere near as painful as that. It's about transitioning. Actually, they wouldn't, instead of being a burden on the national debt, could actually help the national debt. But that kind of thinking, like, oh my God, we've got this big problem. We can't by normal means, and we got to act quickly. When you force government to think outside the box. Now, who would have thought a Conservative government would bring in a program that businesses, going during this lockdown? That's the kind of mindset that you need for climate change. But as I said, it doesn't need to be anywhere near as painful as that. You don't need to put anybody in lockdown. You don't need to shovel loads of money in there. It's about reprofiling money that's already there from something here to something over there, and getting businesses to work with you. Incentives to get businesses that are currently in the wrong industry, that haven't a future, incentivize them to move from that outdated energy industry into this new one. And And that actually isn't as difficult as what they've had to deal with COVID.
Well, very easy. Absolutely simple, isn't it? Allan, look, I'm really grateful for your time today. If people want to get in touch with you, is there a good method of doing that to get in touch with you?
If they want to do it via you, because we have a link.
Absolutely, that's absolutely fine. And so that's through the Bonfire website, bonfireengineering.com. And I'd like to thank you for your time today, Allan, and I do hope that your ideas and the opportunities that are there can happen, because that is where the world is going to have to go, and it's just a case of how quickly. Is it 2050 or is it 2030 or is it 2025? We will see. So that brings us to the end of another episode of the Engineering Ignition podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I do look forward to our next episode of our Experts and Leaders series in the very near future.